Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about Nodkrai's story because I found it generally pretty interesting. Now this video will contain spoilers about Nodkrai, so if you haven't done the story yet, I would suggest that you do so. My three favorite characters in this Nodkrai story were Sandrone. I really enjoyed Sandrone a lot. I really love Sandrone. I was not expecting her to be a brat, but she is a brat, and that's part of the reason why I like her. Second favorite character is probably Nefer. Nefer was like the MVP in the story, in the shadows type of way. And my third favorite character is Jehoda, due to her reactions and her silliness in general. She's basically like the comedy relief of Nodkrai. She's probably one of the most funniest characters we've had in Genshin Impact. Anyways, the plot of Nodkrai is basically the traveler is looking for their spaceship. The only reason we haven't learned about the traveler's spaceship for the past 5 years is because, well, the traveler, when you're waking up from a 500-year-old sleep, your memory is not going to be all that great. And the traveler basically recently remembered that they've traveled to Teyvat in a spaceship. We learn about this in Natlan when the traveler first meets that NPC from Konraya. It was then in there that the traveler remembered that, oh shit, I came here on a spaceship. So we're at Nodkrai right now to look for the traveler's spaceship. So the first thing that the traveler does to get some information about their spaceship is go to Ino and ask about any spaceship parts, since Ino is basically the tech whiz that basically gathers parts and, puts them together to build some silly little robot. And Ino tells us that she has not encountered any spaceship parts, but tells us about the moon scions that may learn about the spaceship. So we go to Llama, who is the head person of the moon scions, to ask about the spaceship. We also ask her to use a specific relic that can read the past to learn about the spaceship. However, Llama basically tells us that we cannot use the relic at this time because it can only be used when the moon is closest to Teyvat in 2 months. So the traveler gets a little sad. They go out for a walk because they can't sleep, and they basically end up encountering Columbina from one of those, damn, I forgot what they're called already. Those like Kuvati Sealies, right? So the first interaction with Columbina was pretty boring, right? Because Columbina herself, when you first encounter her, she seems pretty well distant, right? So the interaction with her was kind of just, a simple hi. That was basically it. We do know that Columbina is pissed off at the Fatui, since mentioning the Fatui kind of made her go sicko mode for a bit. So that was basically it, right? We basically said hi to her, she says hi back, and we get out. After our encounter with Columbina, we meet up with our sibling once again. Our sibling is in Nodkrai. For whatever reason, their goal is to find the relic of the moon scions in order to, I don't know yet, we don't really know. So the sibling asks the traveler in their aid to, well, steal this moon relic. The sibling in this encounter seems a little bit more friendly than normal, and even the traveler themselves seemed kind of odd at this friendly gesture that their sibling is doing, since the whole time the sibling has been kind of like a dick this whole time. But the sibling kind of does apologize and kind of regrets about not adventuring with the traveler sooner. So our sibling basically uses their strange abyssal powers to open up the tomb where the moon relic is. We go through a lot of trials and tribulations in this dungeon to get to the moon relic. At this point of the story, I was kind of convinced that the sibling here was kind of just being friendly to trick us into doing something, and I was technically right. Later on, we do encounter the relic. However, the dungeon itself sensed something impure with the sibling, so like the dungeon kind of kicked us out, and a whole bunch of abyss creatures called the Wild Hunt basically, attacks around the entrance of the ruins. We learn about this information when we encounter Llama after the infiltration of the dungeon. Llama basically tells us that the dungeon will kick impure people out. So the sibling is definitely up to some weird shit since, they are basically impure enough to get kicked out of some holy dungeon. The relic ends up getting stolen anyways. The traveler thinks it was their sibling that stole the relic, but since the dungeon kicked both of them out, somebody else had to do it. And it's most likely the suspect might be the Pte. So Llama goes to Nefer for help. However, Nefer didn't want to help at first because she doesn't want to take sides in Nodkrai since that could ruin her business. Her business is basically selling information and I think wares too. But I think she mostly just deals with like information and shit. So Llama basically tricks Nefer into helping by asking Jehoda, an assistant of Nefer, to help infiltrate the Pte headquarters. And Jehoda is basically like that naive, silly kid. She doesn't really know what's going on, so she basically like agrees to go with us because she don't really know what's going on. But Jehoda tells us that she has to prepare a day to infiltrate the Pte headquarters since this is a pretty big mission. So while we're waiting for the preparations and stuff, we meet up with Llama for a bit. We get a little bit of Llama lore. She is aware that the sky is false and actually wants to tell her people about it. But with the beef going on with the Pte is basically like tampering with the Pte are basically like tampering with the moon goddess statues and stuff. So like with the beef going on, Llama doesn't want to tell the people about the false sky and stuff because that might fuck up morale already enough as it is. After that Llama lore, we do meet up with Columbina again, and this time we have Paimon with us, and Paimon decides to offer Columbina some food since that might help Columbina open up a bit, which kind of works. She basically tells us that she is not from Teyvat. Her goal is to return to the true moon, and she also doesn't really like trusting other groups of people since most groups of people tend to use Columbina for her powers, which is why Columbina is pretty distant to begin with. After meeting up with Columbina, we decide to infiltrate the Pte headquarters with the help of Jehoda, who is a very scaredy cat at first, but ends up going with us anyways. What's interesting about this HQ infiltration is that I think you can go about it in two ways. You can basically just rush on in, or you can just use stealth. I ended up choosing the stealth route because I had a feeling that the game might force me to play Hydro Traveler, and I did not want to play Hydro Traveler. I think Hydro Traveler is really bad, so I just chose the stealth option, which was pretty fun. I think this was probably like one of my favorite parts in the quest, was infiltrating the Pte. Anyways, we get to the bottom of the facility to learn that the relic, aka the moon marrow, which I sort of said earlier, was not there, but my wife Sandrone has it, and Sandrone is out somewhere else. However, we do see one of Llama's people in the Pte headquarters who actually helped the Pte steal the moon marrow. And Llama and her friend basically get into like a small debate about who was right, who was wrong, yada yada yada, while Jehoda was in the background crashing out because she was scared that the Harbinger would show up. But Sandrone is basically like out in the fields somewhere with the moon marrow. So we track down Sandrone. We're about to get into a fight with Sandrone, but all of a sudden the Wild Hunt, aka the Abyss, starts attacking. We also learn that the Wild Hunt has an ability to imposter people. So the sibling that we encountered earlier was an imposter. They are not our real sibling. So after fighting off this Wild Hunt group of the Abyss, Sandrone gets a little bit all tsundere and basically just hands us the moon marrow because, she's kind of tired of doing this shit, basically, right? Sandrone basically had the attitude of, I'm tired of this shit. If you want this, just take it. And we take the moon marrow, and with Llama's help, we decide to put the moon marrow in the traveler's body, so that way the abyss won't get to the moon marrow that easily, since the moon marrow was stolen very easily to begin with. So we decided to hide it in the traveler's body. And Llama, after this whole ordeal, Llama decides to tell her followers about the truth of the moon goddess. And from then on out, some people decided to leave, some people decided to stay. The Archon quest here was pretty much mingled with the character quest, right? We get to know a little bit more about Llama, and Llama gets to solve her troubles during the Archon quest, which is pretty nice, which basically means that players don't have to worry about doing any character quest, since they're basically integrated into the Archon quest. And that's basically the finish of Act 1 of Nodkrai. Now, the Act 2 of Nodkrai, the beginning of it, was pretty boring. However, we kind of later learn that all of this is kind of important. We'll get to that towards the end. So in Act 2, we kind of have to repair Aino's laser cannon to help fend off the wild hunt. And we get the help of an NPC by the name of Sosi, who is basically like the general of the Light Keepers. If you don't know who the Light Keepers are, they're basically like the people that fight the Abyss voluntarily. After fixing up the laser cannon, we ask Nefer for intel about the wild hunt from a drinking game. We didn't really learn much about the drinking game that much. We're learning information about the wild hunt because the wild hunt is pretty dangerous, since they have the ability to imposter people, right? They have the ability to impersonate people, which makes them pretty dangerous, which means that an Abyss person could literally be anybody. After failing to get some information from the drinking game, we deliver some medicine to Llama, since Llama used a ton of power fighting off the wild hunt in Act 1. And we get to meet up with Columbina again to heal her with the moon barrel stuck in the traveler's body. Columbina actually gives us the information that we need about the wild hunt. She basically tells us that there is a sinner who might be controlling the wild hunt to obtain the moon marrow. Columbina also teaches the traveler how to shield the moon marrow in case the wild hunt decides to steal it, which is pretty cool. We also ask Columbina to help us look into the past to learn about the traveler's spaceship. And we get an important piece of information from this scene, as we know that the traveler eventually gets out of the spaceship. However, the sibling never gets out of the spaceship. However, we meet the sibling. We see the sibling anyways, but we never see the sibling get out of the spaceship. So maybe there was never really a sibling to begin with, or maybe the sibling was just an impersonator this whole time. Who really knows? Anyways, Columbina in this scene seems to be a little bit more open than she was in Act 1, which is pretty nice. I do think Columbina is pretty cute. I might end up C6ing her. After learning about that important piece of information from Columbina, we later learn from Aino and Anifa that the leader of the Lightkeeper, Soisui, is dead. So with the help of Mommy Nefer, we investigate his death. The Lightkeepers suspect that it was Fillins that killed Soisui, since Fillins was in the building when Soisui was killed. But because the Traveler and Nefer are aware that the Wild Hunt can impersonate people, it is most likely the Wild Hunt that killed Soisui. With the help of Nefer's intel gathering, we learn that Fillins is out fighting the Wild Hunt in some remote location. Turns out that Fillins was fighting the big bad sinner himself, Renner. Looks like he's dressed up in bondage and shit. Renner is fighting Fillins because Fillins' lantern has Renner's heart in it. And if Renner gets his heart back, he's basically going to be much more stronger than before. But with the help of the Traveler's purification abilities, the Traveler destroys the heart in the lantern, and basically Renner just dips out since, his heart got destroyed. And now there's some weird, creepy, superpowered dude that has the power to impersonate people out in the wild somewhere. So we later learned that it was Renner that killed the Lightkeeper by killing or by impersonating as Fillins. We take Fillins to the crime scene, and we later find out that Soisui might have been killed quite some time ago. And it turns out that the Soisui that we met earlier in the beginning of Act 2 might have been Renner in disguise. But we're still puzzled on why Renner would want to repair the laser cannon to begin with, since destroying the Wild Hunt might actually hinder Renner's plans. Oh, and also, Fillins also tells us a little about his lore. Turns out that Fillins is like a fae that disguises himself, or not disguises himself, but he's a fae that has a human form, and he's basically a Lightkeeper because the Lightkeepers found him, and so that's basically about it. The next day, the NPCs in Nodkrai start to flip out because they somehow obtain the information that the Wild Hunt can impersonate people. So they start, manhunting and witch hunting on like who could be like an impersonator and shit. I do give Renner some props because he does seem like an S rank villain. He's basically like the type of villain that does shit in the shadows, manipulates people, impersonates people just to manipulate them into doing his deeds. We meet up with Fillins in some abandoned library, and we learned that Renner could use Kuvaki as an energy source. And the laser cannon in Nasha Town fires off the Kuvaki. So if Renner can absorb the Kuvaki, he would most likely have an incentive to repair the cannon, since the cannon fires off Kuvaki and Renner can basically just absorb that energy to regain his powers again. We later get a We later get a letter from Llama that the cannon is about to get fired at a specific location. This is most likely This is most likely Renner's doing. So we go to that location to confront Renner because Renner is about to absorb some Kuvaki energy. And Fillins basically sends a letter back to Llama telling Llama don't fire off that cannon because Renner could absorb that Kuvaki energy. Not to mention the Traveler and Fillins is in that specific location, so if that cannon does get fired, not only does Renner get that Kuvaki energy, but the Traveler and Fillins would be in danger. So Nasha Town at this point is in complete chaos due to the rumors of the Wild Hunt impersonating people. We battle against Renner for a bit with the boy Fillins. The cannon ends up getting fired anyways, but Anifa basically lifts up the cannon to aim the laser at the sky, and the Traveler and Fillins also kind of like uses like some weird energetic shield to like prevent the energy from going into Renner. But Renner ends up absorbing some of that energy anyways. However, since we kind of, aimed the laser at a different direction, he couldn't absorb as much Kuvaki. But at this point of the story, Renner is at like 10% power. But that 10% was strong enough to wipe the floor with Fillins and the Traveler. However, Sandrone comes to the rescue but gets bodied anyways, which was pretty funny. Her reaction of getting bodied was funny. We get rescued by Columbina's teleportation magic. Sandrone kind of crashes out for a bit, saying that she's winning, but she was just coping at that point. Fillins thanks Columbina, and basically at this point of the story, we have some weird deranged bondage guy out on the loose that has the power to, destroy a lot of shit. Oh, and Fillins' name gets cleared out due to Nefer, since people suspected Fillins for killing the Lightkeeper leader. The Traveler talks to Columbina for a bit about the future of Nodkrai. We get information that Arlecchino and Dottore are also in Nodkrai, so we got those two characters to look forward to. Also towards the end of Act 2, we see Renner interact with Varka for a bit. So I guess Varka has a plan with Renner, I guess. Maybe Renner in the future could be playable. Who really knows? But that's basically about it. That's the end of the Nodkrai story. I thought it was pretty good. The pacing was generally pretty fair. I know Act 2's beginning was pretty slow at first, but it also kind of helped with the Renner plot a little bit. But yeah, I generally enjoyed the story. I think I'll give the story maybe like maybe like a 10 out of 10, maybe. I mean, a lot of the characters interacted with each other. That was pretty good. Pacing was fair. I liked Act 1 and Act 2 a lot. Hopefully the future will be just as good. I'm not gonna hold my head too high about that, but you know, pretty enjoyable story. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys later.
Bye-bye now. Come again soon.